Konnichiwa minasan, o genki desu ka? Welcome to the intermediate course of my channel. Let's learn Japanese with Eric. If you have minimal background in the Japanese language or have limited knowledge of Japanese particles, adjective, and basic verb conjugation, or how Japanese sentences are put together, please review the playlist of the basic course, which covers lessons 1 to 31, and watch the video you need makeup lessons on. Otherwise, let's begin. Hajimemashou. In this lesson, you'll add to your noun vocabulary by converting many common verbs to noun counterparts that mean the way of. So nouns like the way of eating, the way of drinking, way of talking, these are all derived from their verbs. TABEKATA means the way of eating. Nomikata means way of drinking. And hanashikata means the way of talking. The formula for making these kinds of nouns is to take the conjunctive form of the verb and add the suffix kata, which means the way of. Conjunctive kata also means the manner of or the style of doing something. This kind of conjugation works for almost all verbs and is very useful. Now let's do a quick review of the conjunctive form of the verb. If you recall the 10 basic verb conjugations, the conjugation we use for kata is the conjunctive form of the verb. To make the conjunctive form from the mas form, simply drop mas. What's left is the conjunctive form. For example, tabemasu yields tabe. Conjunctive form of yomimasu is yomi. And the conjunctive form of tsukaimasu is tsukai. There are three major categories of Japanese verbs. The Category 1 or root-dropping verbs, Category 2 or last hiragana changing verbs, and Category 3 or the irregular verbs. For a more detailed explanation of how to form the basic verb conjugations, please review lessons 26 to 30. We will also be using verbs introduced in these lessons in our examples here. If you want to know more about basic Japanese sentence construction, please review lessons 22 to 24, all in our English playlist. However, if you start off from the dictionary forms, you need to remember a few things. Depending on the category of the verb, if it's a Category 1 verb, simply drop the ru, and what's left is the conjunctive form. For example, the verb TABERU, which means to eat. Drop the ru, what's left is tabe, and that's the conjunctive form. For Category 2 or last hiragana changing verbs, the last hiragana of the dictionary form is changed to the I series. These are the 9 kinds of endings: kugusu, bumunu, ru, tsu, and u. And to make their conjunctive forms, they all change to their I series counterparts, as you can quickly see here: kigishi, bimini, ri, chi, and i. So for conjugating Category 2 verbs, it's the verb ending you need to pay attention to, and you change them into the I series to form their conjunctive. As for the 5 commonly used irregular verbs, suru becomes shikata, which means the way of doing something. Kuru becomes kikata, or the way of coming to a place. And iku becomes ikikata, or the way of going to a place. Aru and da do not participate in this conjugation. Let's look at examples for each verb category, starting with Category 1 or the root-dropping verbs. Our first example is the verb taberu, which means to eat. Dropping the ru forms tabe, which is the conjunctive, and if we add kata to it, we form TABEKATA, TABEKATA, which means the way of eating. And using it in a sentence, please teach me the way to eat sushi. There are many ways to eat sushi. You can eat sushi with chopsticks or use your fingers. And in Japanese, we say, sushi no tabekata o oshiete kudasai. Sushi no tabekata o oshiete kudasai. This sentence is a request. To learn more about how to form requests in Japanese, you can review Lesson 39. Now let's look at the Category 2 verbs, starting with the ku ending. Our verb is kaku, which means to write. Changing the ku to ki, we form the conjunctive form kaki. Adding kata to it, we get kakikata, kakikata, which means the way of writing. In a sense, shall I show you how to write kanji? Or shall I show you the way of writing kanji? As you know, kanji is written in structured strokes. And in Japanese, we say, kanji no kakikata o misemashou ka? Kanji no kakikata o misemashou ka? This sentence is an invitation or volition. To review this sentence structure, you can watch lesson 34. Now let's look at a gu ending verb. Our verb is oyogu, which means to swim. Changing the gu to gi, we get oyogi, our conjunctive form. And adding kata to it, we form oyogikata, oyogikata, which means the way of swimming or swimming style. In a sense, freestyle is my favorite style of swimming. Freestyle is hira oyogi in Japanese. And so the whole sentence, in plain style, hira oyogi wa boku no ichiban suki na oyogikata da. Hira oyogi wa boku no ichiban suki na oyogikata da. For a su ending verb, let's look at hanasu, which means to talk. The su ending changes to shi to form hanashi as the conjunctive. Adding kata to it, we form hanashikata, hanashikata, which means the way of talking or the way of speaking. Our sentence, I will study the way Japanese people speak. In Japanese, Nihonjin no hanashikata o benkyou shimasu. Nihonjin no hanashikata o benkyou shimasu. For a bu ending verb, we have yobu, which means to call. Changing the bu to bi gives us the conjunctive, which is yobi. And adding kata, we form yobikata, yobikata, which means the way of calling. Our sample sentence, the way of calling the dogs is by a whistle. There are dog whistles that send out sound in the range that only dogs can hear. Dog is inu and whistle is kuchibue. In Japanese, inu no yobikata wa kuchibue de shimasu. Inu no yobikata wa kuchibue de shimasu. Let's look at a mu ending verb, nomu, which means to drink. Changing the mu ending to mi, we get nomi, which is the conjunctive. And adding kata, we form nomikata, nomikata, which means the way of drinking. Our sentence, teach me the delicious way to drink sake. Now there's this whole etiquette of how to drink sake properly, whether to drink it hot or chilled, which sake type goes with which kinds of food, pouring for others, how to hold your cup, and so on. In Japanese, we say, oishii osake no nomikata o oshiete kudasai. Oishii osake no nomikata o oshiete kudasai. There is only one nu ending verb in the whole Japanese language, and that is shinu, which means to die. The nu changes to ni to form shini, which is our conjunctive, and adding kata, we form shinikata, shinikata, which means the way of dying. Our sentence, everyone has a different way of dying, meaning we all die in different ways. In Japanese, we say, minna wa ironna shinikata o suru. Minna wa ironna shinikata o suru. For a ru ending verb, let's use tsukuru, which means to make. Changing the ru to ri, we form tsukuri, our conjunctive form. And adding kata to it, we form tsukurikata, tsukurikata, which means the way of making. And using it in a sentence, the way of making sukiyaki is simple. Sukiyaki is a common hot pot dish. And in Japanese, we say, sukiyaki no tsukurikata wa kantan desu. Sukiyaki no tsukurikata wa kantan desu. For tsu ending, our verb is motsu, which means to hold. And changing tsu to chi forms the conjunctive, mochi, and adding kata, we form mochikata, mochikata, which means the way of holding. Our sense, let's practice how to hold a kitten, or let's practice the way of holding kittens. There's a certain way to hold these cute, fragile creatures. Kitten is koneko, and to practice is renshu suru. In Japanese, koneko no mochikata o renshu shimashou. Koneko no mochikata o renshu shimashou. For an u ending verb, let's use tsukau, which means to use. Conjunctive is tsukai, and adding kata to it, we form tsukaikata. Tsukaikata, meaning the way of using. The sentence, do you know the way to use the machine? Or do you know how to use the machine? This is an important question to ask when you're new to using a machine, especially industrial ones. Machine is kikai, and to understand how something works, we use the verb wakaru. In Japanese, kikai no tsukaikata ga wakarimasu ka? Kikai no tsukaikata ga wakarimasu ka? Now let's take a look at the category 3 verbs or the irregular verbs. First one is suru, which means to do. Conjunctive is shi plus kata forms shikata. Shikata, which means way of doing. Our sense is a very common expression. There's no way of doing it, or it can't be helped. In other words, you give up. In Japanese, you say shikata ga nai. Shikata ga nai. You'll often hear people say this to express resignation. Now the verb suru forms compound verbs with nouns. To express the way of doing version, you need to connect the noun part of the compound verb with shikata, which is grammatically a noun, with the particle no. For example, the verb to cook is ryori suru. Ryori suru. Way of cooking is ryori no shikata. Ryori no shikata. Particle no connects ryori with shikata. Our sentence, I study the way of doing French cuisine. French cuisine is furansu ryori, and studied is benkyou shimashita. In Japanese, Furansu ryori no shikata o benkyou shimashita. Furansu ryori no shikata o benkyou shimashita. The verb to go is iku. Conjunctive form iki. Adding kata, we form ikikata. Ikikata, which means the way of going to a place. Our sample sentence, the fastest way of going to Kyoto is the bullet train. Fastest is ichiban hayai, and bullet train is shinkansen. In Japanese, Kyoto e no ichiban hayai ikikata wa shinkansen desu. Kyoto e no ichiban hayai ikikata wa shinkansen desu. Now let's see additional kata conjugations in all verb categories. These are quite common in daily conversation. Starting with ru-dropping verbs, akeru means to open, and akekata means way of opening, such as the way of opening a can of food. Kanzime no akekata. Ikiru means to live, and ikikata means the way of living or lifestyle. Kangaeru means to think, and kangaekata means way of thinking. Osheru means to teach, and oshiekata means way of teaching or teaching style. Kiru means to wear clothes, and kikata means the way of wearing, which is a big deal when you wear a kimono. Yaseru means to become thin, while yasekata means the way of losing weight, whether through diet, exercise, or some other method. Miru means to see. Mikata means the way of looking or someone's perspective. Tateru means to build, and TABEKATA means way of building. Let's look at the category 2 verbs, starting with ku ending. Aruku means to walk, and arukikata means way or style of walking, like how do supermodels walk. Kiku means to listen or ask a question. Kikikata Kikikata means way of asking, whether it's polite, direct, or whether you ask personally or through writing. Hiku means to pull, and hikikata means way of pulling. Yaku means to bake, and yakikata means method or style of baking. Here we see a chef baking pizza in a traditional brick oven. Next is gu-ending verbs. Sosogu means to pour, and sosogikata means way of pouring, whether fast, slow, whether you use a funnel. Waiters have to be careful with their sosogikata when pouring drinks for customers. Nugu means to strip or remove clothing. Nugikata means way of removing clothes. This is especially important when removing clothes from a bedridden patient or when wearing an expensive gown or costume. For su-ending, we have hosu, to dry. Hoshikata means method of drying. For example, drying clothes outdoors in a clothesline or in a clothes dryer. Kesu means to erase, and keshikata means way of erasing. Do you use a rubber eraser or whiteout correction fluid? For bu ending, we have tobu, which means to fly. Tobikata means way of flying. Insects, birds, bats, airplanes, and helicopters all have different tobikata. Hakobu means to carry, and hakobikata means way of carrying. Do you use pure human muscle or use a trolley? For mu ending, our first verb is nusumu, which means to steal. Nusumikata means way of stealing, like this pickpocket here. Yomu means to read, and yomikata means way of reading. Each kanji typically has several different yomikata. For ru ending, our first example is kiru, which means to cut. Kirikata means way of cutting or slicing. Kirikata is important when making sushi, sashimi, or preparing choice cuts of beef and pork and so on. Noru means to ride, and norikata means way of riding. The norikata when riding a car would be different from the norikata when riding a motorcycle, horse, or camel. For ru ending, we have noboru, which means to climb. Noborikata means way of climbing. The noborikata of climbing a mountain would be different from, say, the noborikata of climbing a tree or scaling a building. Uru means to sell, and urikata is the way of selling. The urikata of a physical store is different from the urikata of an online store. For tsu ending, katsu means to win, and kachikata means way of winning. Did you win fair and square, or did you cheat? Utsu means to hit, and uchikata means way of hitting. Sharpshooters have very good uchikata to hit the bullseye. For u ending, arau means to wash, and araikata means way of washing, whether you wash dirty dishes by hand or use the dishwasher. Harau means to pay, and haraikata means way of paying. You can pay by cash, credit card, debit card, or use a personal check. The Japanese verb to say is you. Iikata means way of saying. Is it polite, direct, rough? Warau means to laugh, and waraikata means way of laughing. Some people laugh out loud while others cover their mouths when they do so. So to summarize, in this lesson we learned how to express the way of doing, forming new nouns from verbs. For example, the way of eating is TABEKATA, coming from the verb to eat, TABERU. The formula for this conjugation is by taking the conjunctive form of the verb and adding kata, which means the way of, manner of, or style of. By knowing this conjugation, you can further increase your noun vocabulary using your knowledge of Japanese verbs. The key to speaking fluent Japanese is really your knowledge of verbs, and that is what my whole language program aims to give you. My curriculum is very verb-based, so it's a great idea if you can get hold of a verb book so you can learn more Japanese verbs. A very good one that I strongly recommend is Tuttle's The Complete Japanese Verb Guide, which retails for about $14 on Amazon. Older versions of the book could be had for way cheaper, around $5 or $6. And the book gives you about 400 Japanese verbs and over 200 compound suru verbs. I'll attach the link to the book below. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Dewa, otsukaresama deshita. Ganbatte kudasai. If you're serious about becoming fluent in Japanese, it's important to practice daily, learn grammar, and build up vocabulary. My whole course is designed to give you a strong basic foundation in the Japanese language that you can build solidly on. So please click like, share, or subscribe, and watch the next video in the series. Nihongo no benkyou ni ganbatte kudasai. じゃあ、またね。